Every one of us knows the feeling of saying something and immediately regretting it. Whether it was at a work party, a wedding, a casual hangout with friends, or a bris, we've all uttered a combination of mouth noises that left another person shocked, offended, or uncomfortably silent. As someone with a lot of social anxiety and a very dark sense of humor, I usually know when I'm taking a leap of faith on some morbid joke I'm about to make. They don't all land right, like my grandma when I pushed her down the stairs. And I'm willing to take whatever backlash comes as a result. But other times, my foot ends up in my mouth by total accident. I upset someone unintentionally during a casual interaction and don't really know how to respond because I never expected them to get so wound up. That's why, in some ways, texting and email is so much better. There is way more time to articulate the perfect response instead of clumsily word vomiting your way through the conversation. The biggest trade-off, though, is that text is open to a whole new world of interpretations. Ending a sentence with a period versus an exclamation point completely changes the tone. And if you mess up, then that text could live on forever as proof. It's for this reason that I do not envy authors. Sure, books go through a lengthy approval process, so by the time they're published, the necessary revisions have already been made, but a few mistakes are bound to make their way to the final product, where they're exposed to the ever-judgmental masses. Sometimes they take the form of typos, other times it's continuity issues, and on rare occasions they can even be a little bit racist. Those of you who've seen my episode on the messed up origins of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory no doubt remember the original version of Oompa Loompas. Because how could you forget? Willy Wonka discovered them in the deepest parts of the African jungle where no white man had ever been before, rescued them from the dangerous beasts who lived there by offering them a home in his factory, sent them over in wooden crates, and put them to work, paying them only in cocoa beans. By the time this book was published in 1964, readers were already unsure what to make of this kind of depiction of African people. It should be made clear that author Roald Dahl envisioned Oompa Loompas as fantasy creatures, hence them being 2 feet tall and able to survive on a diet of exclusively chocolate, but it had a little too much overlap with real-world history for it not to be a little bit sus. So, when the 1971 movie adaptation with Gene Wilder started development, producers were concerned about how exactly to portray these characters on screen without drawing unwanted comparisons to slavery. And after a lot of public pressure, Roald Dahl revisited the story and gave them a completely new design that resembled fairies from European folklore, by lightening their hair and skin and changing their home country to Loompa Land. But as surprising as it is that a children's author would include such an insensitive depiction of an entire race of people, he's not the only one. Pamela Lyndon Travers made a similar mistake in the very first Mary Poppins book, caricaturizing not just one entire culture, but 4 of them, which resulted in the book being banned in certain libraries. She did go back and revise the offending chapter decades later, but copies of the original publication still exist. So today I'm going to unpack it to see if it really is as offensive as people claim. Before we get into that though, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Raycon. If you've been watching for a while, then you already know how much I love Raycon. I've always thought they were the best value earbuds on the market, considering you get the same audio quality as the big brands for half the price. But now I've got even more reasons to love them, because Raycon just rolled out their newest model of fan favorite everyday earbuds. With the upgraded version, you not only get the superb sound quality you expect from Raycon, but also enjoy features like ergonomic design, multi-point connectivity for pairing with 2 devices, and active noise cancellation. They're also available in a variety of vibrant colors, so you can pick the one that matches your style the best. I went with the classic black this time, but then I saw they had these super cool patterns on the protective case, so I went a little wild and got the galaxy print. No regrets. But what seals the deal for me is the 32-hour battery life and the quick charge function. 10 minutes of charging gives you an unbelievable 90 minutes of playtime. The Raycon Everyday Earbuds are my go-to choice if I want to be immersed in music during my workouts, while working at the computer, and even during chill evenings. So if you want to join me and experience the magic of Raycon for yourself, go to buyraycon.com/solo to get 15% off your order and free shipping. With their 30-day happiness guarantee, you've got nothing to lose. For context, the offending chapter, titled Bad Tuesday, is found about halfway through Mary Poppins' first literary adventure, and the opening is kinda hilarious. Brief summary, Michael Banks wakes up on the wrong side of the bed one morning and decides that he's gonna be a little bitch that day. He wouldn't cooperate when Mary Poppins bathed him, he kicked the housemaid in her shin because her legs were too fat. His words, not mine. He tied the neighbor dog's tail to the fence, and he even pushed his baby siblings, John and Barbara, to the ground. That's right, the Bankses have 4 kids in the original story, not 2. If you want to hear a detailed comparison of more of their similarities and differences, check out my episode on the messed up origins of Mary Poppins. Later in the chapter, Mary is walking through the park with Michael and his sister Jane when she just so happens to spot a silver compass on the ground. She encourages Michael to pick it up and bring it to her, and when he does, she gives it a little shake and says, "North." Now it's at this exact moment where the original and revised versions go their separate ways, and while I can't absolutely tell you how and why they differ, I want you to know that I tried my absolute hardest to get a first edition copy of the book before filming this episode. I admit I should have been on the hunt sooner because I planned out this video like a month ago, but I just assumed I'd be able to find a full version for free online. Not sure why, because that's not how it worked for my breakdown of the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but I guess I wasn't thinking clearly. Well, I'm happy to report that after combing through a dozen listings that ranged in price from $400 to $2,500, I was somehow lucky enough to find one on eBay that no one had bid on yet. So I placed my starting bid at a whopping $12 and won. The book is currently on its way to me as I record this, but the earliest that I could get it here was July 13th, days after I planned on posting this episode, so unfortunately, I just can't wait that long. The good news is, I don't really need the original version, because as it turns out, in 1974, P.L. Travers was interviewed about the chapter and her revisions by a publication called Interracial Books for Children, and they quoted the most messed up passages word for word. And another weird discovery I made was that Little Golden Books published their own miniseries where they took chapters of Mary Poppins books and turned them into self-contained stories. And this one, called The Magic Compass, was published in 1953. Almost 20 years before Travers issued her first revisions. Now, I did manage to find a used copy of the Golden Book on Amazon for $12, so I ordered it, but this one also wasn't going to get to me on time. So I found another listing for $128, and it wouldn't get here in time either. But lucky for us, there are some pictures of the book online, so between that and the quotes from the interview, we can pretty much experience their adventure how Travers originally intended. And once I start reading through it, there will be no doubt in your mind that this is the uncensored version. So after Mary says north, she and the Banks children are magically transported to the North Pole, where the Inuit live, although the book refers to them as Eskimos. Mary's given a warm welcome from an Inuit man who rubs his nose against hers, also known as an Eskimo kiss, and then does the same to the Banks children before his wife emerges from their igloo and shows off their baby in a sealskin shawl. As you can see, there's already no shortage of stereotypes, like the igloos and Eskimo kisses. Sure, they come from a grain of truth, like the Inuit really do use igloos as temporary shelter on hunting excursions, and they do perform a gesture with their babies where they press their noses up to their cheeks and inhale. This is called a kunik, but the Eskimo kiss, as we know it, was born out of a lie that director Robert J. Flaherty told in his documentary on the Inuit called Nanook of the North, which is probably the worst place to spread misinformation. After getting enough frostbite for one day, Mary says the word south, and she and the children are magically transported to a blazing hot climate. It's here they meet an African man and woman. At least, I think they're African. The book doesn't say exactly where they are, but if we're to judge from their clothing and the setting, it certainly looks like they're in Africa. Then again, when you look at the dialogue where the mom offers to bring the kid some watermelon and says how these white babies need to be darkened with black shoe polish, it reminds me of the way Southern characters are written in Uncle Remus's tales, with their folksy way of talking. So I'm not sure what Travers was going for here, but it kinda seems like she combined all the stereotypes for Africans and African Americans. After exchanging some kind words, the trio is transported to the east, where they meet an elderly Chinese man who greets them by bowing so low that his head touches the ground. Mary reciprocates this greeting, then she chastises the kids into doing the same. This part was a little confusing because after some light research I learned that bowing actually isn't a common greeting in Chinese culture, as opposed to Japanese, so I assumed they were in Japan. But the book describes the man as Mandarin multiple times, so he would have to be Chinese. The man seems to be honored by their visit, saying, "Honorable Mary of the House of Poppins, deign to shed upon my unworthy abode the light of your virtuous countenance." But Mary responds by saying they can't stay there for too long, and a few moments later, she transports them to the west. It's here that she and the children stumble upon a whole Native American tribe in the process of conducting some kind of ceremony. It must not have been too important though, because the tribe's chief, Sun at Noonday, walks over to welcome Mary to his wigwam by touching his forehead to hers and invites them to join for supper. When she tells him they don't have the time, he insists that Michael at least be allowed to test his strength against his great-great-great-grandson, Fleet as the Wind, who goes on to easily outrun Michael and Jane in a foot race. Now, if at this point you still don't find the events of the chapter to be that insensitive, then that's your perspective, and I'm not going to argue with you. But it's hard to deny that this final scene is anything but. Because when Mary and the children return home, Michael is still acting like a total brat and decides that he's going to use the compass to run away from home. He picks it up, shouts all the directions in rapid succession, and suddenly, he's surrounded. On each side of him looms a huge, terrifying figure. The Inuit man stands at the ready with his spear, the African woman has her husband's club, the Chinese man is wielding a long, curved sword, and the Native American clutches his tomahawk. They're all looking down at Michael with red-hot, angry expressions and charging toward him, swinging their weapons in his direction. And at the precise moment he screams for Mary Poppins' help, he wakes up in his bed. It turns out it was all a bad dream. Or maybe it wasn't. It's hard to ascertain reality whenever Poppins is around. Regardless, I think we can all agree the chapter took a weird turn at the end there. Michael's formerly friendly companions from around the world all turn on him without the slightest provocation, which in my view completely negates the positive impression they just had on the book's young readers. I can't help but think of that famous Mr. Rogers episode where he invited the police officer, who just so happened to be African American, to cool his feet off with him in the kiddie pool. It was a historic moment showing a white guy and a black guy sharing the same pool water on TV, which is so ridiculous it almost sounds made up, but it's not. This was a huge sign of progress in our society, and the Bad Tuesday chapter kinda reminds me of that, because like Mr. Rogers, Mary Poppins' friendships with so many kinds of people sets a great example for the children reading it. But I think we can all agree this moment with Mr. Rogers would not be looked back on so fondly if the police officer spoke like he was from the deep south and then took out a lunchbox filled with watermelon. And if the scene ended with him pulling out a gun and threatening Mr. Rogers, we'd all be asking, what the f*** was the point of that then? That is not even an analogy. It's almost exactly what happens in Bad Tuesday. But I suppose we should keep in mind that it was written in 1934 and the world was a very different place back then. For reference, Alcatraz prison had just opened up on January 1st of that year. In May, the notorious criminals Bonnie and Clyde were killed by the Gippsland posse. Lou Gehrig played his 1500th consecutive baseball game in September, and only a month before that, Hitler became the dictator of Germany. 90 years ago, the general public wasn't nearly as educated on the subtleties of different cultures, because people just weren't as connected as they are now. Your only exposure to other kinds of people was through books and the media at that time was only a little more cultured than the average Joe. Or it just straight up lied like that documentary on the Inuit. As a result, no one cared when people from distant lands were simplified, caricaturized, and even stereotyped because most Westerners didn't even realize that's what was happening. I mean, think about it. If someone told you about these strange customs of a culture that you'd never heard of from a country you'd never been to, then you'd have no reason to doubt them. Especially without a handy device in your pocket that could verify all of their claims. I'm not saying nobody knew any better, but the vast majority of them didn't. And so these exaggerated depictions of the Inuit, Chinese, Africans, and Native Americans were in line with most of the media people consumed at that time, so it didn't raise any red flags. Things did change eventually, though. Obviously, because if they didn't, I wouldn't be making this episode. As I alluded to earlier, Miss Pamela Travers made more than one revision to the Mary Poppins story. And I want to thank Lena Slavova from the MaryPoppinsEffect.com for her fantastic write-up detailing the timeline of these events. The first change that Miss Travers made to Mary Poppins was in 1971, about 37 years after the book was published. The story goes that Travers' friend, who was a school teacher, told Travers that she was embarrassed to read Mary Poppins to the black students in her class because it included the words Negro lady and pickaninny baby. For those who don't know, because I didn't, in some countries, pickaninny just means child, but in the southern US, it was used to refer to the children of African slaves, or just African Americans in general. And to be honest, that has me even more confused about which South Mary took the children to. Because if you look at the original text, it says, "Beneath the palm tree sat a man and a woman, both quite black all over and with very few clothes on. But to make up for this, they wore a great many beads. Some hung around their heads just below great crowns of feathers. On the knee of the Negro lady sat a tiny black pickaninny with nothing on at all. It smiled at the children as its mother spoke. 'I've been 'spectin' you a long time, Mare Poppins,' she said, smiling. 'You bring dem chillun dare into my lil' house for a slice of watermelon right now. My, but dem's very white babies. You want use a lil' bit black boot polish on dem. Come long now, you's a mighty welcome.'"
Stop it! What you want, cookie?
Like I said before, it really seems like Travers is just carelessly amalgamating African culture with African American culture. But apparently, the very moment that her friend told her how derogatory it was, Travers decided that she was going to rewrite it. When she was interviewed in 1974 for Interracial Books for Children, she said, "If even one black child were troubled, or she, the school teacher, were troubled, I would have to alter it." Then, when the interviewer brought up her use of the term street Arab, and a few other pejoratives that I won't be repeating because I think I'm pushing my luck already, she said, "If anybody said it made them squirm, I would have changed that too. But I don't think that any normal person would squirm at that term." I respectfully disagree with her on that, but I live in 2024. And the fact that she was willing to change her language after learning it made her readers uncomfortable is a testament to how much she cared about them. Those who know about Walt Disney's experience dealing with Travers while adapting Mary Poppins to film will remember that she fought tooth and nail over every single detail that was changed. But here, she simply wanted the book to be accessible to everyone. Or maybe it was about keeping her sales numbers up. Who knows? The reason I highlight her good intentions here is because Travers' first revision wasn't very thorough. She left the cultures referenced in the Northwest and East completely unchanged, and the southern portion was barely altered. The new line reads, "Under the palm trees sat a man and a woman as black and shiny and plumb as a ripe plum. And on the knee of the dark lady sat a tiny plum black baby with nothing on at all." Somehow, I'm even more uncomfortable. I'm just gonna say it. I don't care that you broke your elbow. Also, this was pretty pathetic. It's like Travers saw the problematic words and then replaced them using a slurthosaurus, which sounds like a racist dinosaur. What I really don't understand is why she didn't just call them black like the Little Golden Book did. That was published almost 20 years before she made the revision, but for some reason she just had to go into a weird amount of detail about their complexion. Now, some argue that Travers' words shouldn't be read into so much. She was known for being a unique woman who lived in a world of fantasy as opposed to the sociological world that these complaints came from. She simply wasn't thinking about the real-world implications of her word choice because the book doesn't take place in the real world. With that in mind, there is also the argument that there's no value judgment placed on any of these cultures within the story. They may not be the most accurate portrayals, but complex ideas, like other kinds of humans existing, have to be simplified for children to understand them. And unfortunately, that oversimplification can cross over into stereotype territory, which is exactly what Travers did when she wrote this 90 years ago. And even if it's not the most accurate, I do think there is value in exposing children to new ways of living and thinking at an early age. Firstly, so they know that not everyone thinks and behaves exactly like them, but also because that exposure may spark a lifelong appreciation of that culture, and as they get older and learn more about its customs and history, they'll more than likely be spreading that knowledge to those around them, which directly combats prejudice and stereotyping. I realize that's a very idealistic outlook. I'm talking best case scenario. But I am curious what outcome these people are worried about if these portrayals were still included to this day, because I don't think any KKK members were motivated by reading Mary Poppins as a child. If anything, bigotry is the result of an underexposure to new cultures. Regardless, there came a time where the general public would no longer tolerate Pamela Travers' supposed prejudice. In 1980, the San Francisco Public Library removed Mary Poppins from its shelves because of the alleged racist and derogatory treatment of minorities in it. Apparently, Travers was pretty pissed about this, and that her publisher didn't defend her or even inform her that it happened. Travers found out about the book's removal from her friend and shortly thereafter decided to completely rewrite the magic compass portion of the chapter. Instead of meeting people from new cultures, the trip became a worldwide adventure through nature. Instead of an Inuit, they meet a polar bear. Instead of Africans, they meet a hyacinth macaw. The Chinese man was replaced with a panda, and the Native Americans were substituted for dolphins. The chapter still ends with Michael being pounced on by his new friends though, which I found to be a weird twist, even before I knew the original version featured people. Now it seems completely inappropriate. But what are your thoughts on this whole debacle? The book being banned in San Francisco, Travers' revisions, and whether all of this drama was justified? Let me know in a comment down below. Usually I'm against any form of censorship. I think I've made that pretty clear in my Roald Dahl series, but these changes were made by Travers voluntarily in response to feedback from concerned readers, so it doesn't really bother me at all. After you finish commenting your perspective, make sure to like and subscribe to get more deep dives into folklore, myth, and literature sent to your sub box every Thursday. I'll see you all again next week with a deep dive into some Greek gods you've never heard of. Hopefully, otherwise my title will be a lie. Until then, my name is Jon Solo, and remember, Jon shot first.